I often hear a lot of people asking about shadow people, sharing their experiences with them, among other things involving their presence, what they do, what or who they are, and more. While I do not know if this is in fact the truth about shadow people, it is the closest and most reasonable explanation I've come up with, and I've done loads of research. If you're by chance wondering why I have spent so much time doing said research, it simply has all been driven by my pure fascination with these entities in general, and deciphering the mystery of them has evolved into somewhat of an underlying passion of mine. Knowledge is power, after all. Some people say that shadow people are interdimensional beings. Others say they're aliens. Maybe they're ghosts, angels, or perhaps even demons. The list goes on. Now, believe me when I say that I do not want to make this whole religious thing. I'm not a superstitious person. I do, however, like to say that shadow people are jinns that can actually take on any form they want. In other words, this is simply what I believe, for the most part at least, that many have claimed to be the truth. Until we get more information, however, we won't get much further in terms of deciphering the underlying and actual truth behind them. I'm just here to provide some of that information I've heard through the grapevine. Shadow people are jinns that were here before humans and are made of smokeless fire. Videla said, they are not actually shadows, but instead are made out of the same material as the heat on top of a flame. They live here on Earth among us, but cannot be seen simply because they choose not to be. They only show up as they feel as though it's necessary, or if they're called upon. And as for those who encounter shadow people involuntarily, this is because they are greatly attracted to people and or locations that radiate or are associated with negative energy or emotions. If your mind is under the influence in any way, shape or form, that potentially unlocks great sensory or emotional channels that attract them as well. When they can be seen, most of them keep to themselves, unless they've been called upon or provoked. Their lifespan is unknown, but could range anywhere from hundreds to thousands of years old. Though interestingly, they merely have the mental capacity of about a 10 to 15-year-old. That is why a lot of the things they do are relatively inexplicable and can be incredibly difficult to interpret. Shadow people are actually more afraid of us than we are of them, but they're intrigued by us at the same time. Some can actually fall in love with humans. They also love it when we try to theorize about them because they actually never want people to know their truths. Some people claim that humans have used shadow people since the days of Babylon for black magic, which is another topic in and of itself. Some shadow people can in fact be spirits or demons, as some may say. Alternatively, many people have documented benevolent encounters with them, to the point of absolutely insisting that they're harmless. I see people say this far too often, to be honest. They do, however, and factually speaking, have a dark agenda towards mankind. And while they may not always attack you physically, their war with you is one of the soul. So, how exactly should one go about getting rid of them? Well, first of all, if you find yourself encountering a shadow person frequently and they're not doing anything, then you probably don't have much to worry about. Odds are, though, if that it's happening to you, then you're radiating a relatively large amount of any of the negative emotions I mentioned earlier. The best thing to do is simply ignore them, and they usually go away. If this doesn't work, a lot of people claim that mentally telling them to leave works as well. Another method includes spitting at them, which is usually more effective. They're also incredibly sensitive to sound, for it's my understanding that shadow people can hear the quietest of utterances of both your conscious and subconscious thoughts, even including your memories. That's why, in terms of banishing them, some success stories I've heard involve shouting at them, or perhaps even singing one of your favourite songs as loud as you can at the sight of them. Not only does this work because of how astronomically sensitive their perceptions are, but it also radiates positive energy that they clearly want nothing to do with. Thus, should you encounter any, if you imagine something such as a loud, piercing scream, they just might cheese it out with air, If that doesn't work, you could try emitting a high-pitched frequency out of any speaker you have at your disposal. Unless, of course, you're dealing with a shadow person who means some serious business. They'll almost always not be able to handle it, and will send them packing. Some shadow people are stronger than others, so while some may be easy to get rid of, others may require more of an aggressive approach. With that, there's also the act of praying, which to my knowledge is one of, if not the most belligerent method of banishment. It might work because using this method in any way certainly means you're on the right tracks in terms of expelling them. But from what I've heard, the most aggressive and effective way of ridding you and or your home of shadow people is that of reciting certain religious verses that causes them to, quite literally, burn. A lot of people also talk about encountering one very hostile shadow person in particular, usually seen wearing a trench coat, a top hat, sometimes a briefcase, and other times bearing red eyes. Although any shadow person can have red eyes, they just aren't as common. They are, however, always malevolent. The entity in question, and whom I'm referring to, is known as the Hat Man, and I sincerely promise that he is not friendly. Not even a little bit. If you see or have ever seen the Hat Man, then I feel very sorry for your misfortune. While he usually doesn't attack you physically, he normally comes around during very low, dark, sad, and distressing points in your lives, in order to do what many other shadow people do and feed off our negative energy and emotions, which in turn makes him stronger. He also sometimes serves as a representation of an upcoming negative event, such as the death of a loved one or an accident of some kind. The short version is, he's definitely not good news. That about sums up everything factual that I know about shadow people. Hopefully this answers or explains some things you've been wondering about, as well as any concerns you may have had. Again, just to clarify, I'm by no means a superstitious person. I do not know if there is a God, a heaven, a hell, an afterlife, or any of that. Shadow people may or may not at all be jinns, but aside from that claim, I firmly believe that nearly everything else I said rings true. It started back in 2011. I was 12 and had moved into a new home with my family. From the get-go, that place made me feel some type of way. It wasn't good or bad, just like I was always being watched, which of course creeped me out. There were a handful of hot spots throughout the house, one being what we called the pink bathroom, which, as you can guess, was all pink. Pink tiling, pink sink, pink flooring, everything. It was also a bit small. I always felt like it was a bit hard to breathe in there, and overall just hated the energy. I figured maybe I was just claustrophobic. Another was this part of the hall that led directly into my bedroom, and branched off directly into the living room as well. Kind of like a T on a road. Anyways, you almost always felt eyes coming from that corner, whether you were in the living room or my room, and it just felt as creepy regardless if it was morning or night. The final spot was of course the basement. The basement was half finished. The finished half was like a bar area, had the stools and everything still there, and the unfinished half was the laundry, storage, workshop. Actually, when we first moved in there, my dad's sister and I were looking through the workshop. There were a bunch of old yearbooks from the school I went to, and other memorabilia. We took a break, headed upstairs for lunch, and came back to find that the door would no longer open. It seemed the door handle had fallen off while we were away, and the door was stuck in place. Not super sure how that could happen, especially considering it locked from inside and none of us locked it. On top of that, my mom made my sister and I wash our dog down in the basement. We had a laundry area and a big tub sink, but we hated doing it. I always felt when I was down there that someone was just watching me. I even had an idea of what he looked like. I imagined a very tall man in a button-up and slacks, standing in the corner, right by the entrance to the back of the bar area that resided mainly on the furnished side. My hair would stand on end, and always I would sprint up those stairs whenever I was done down there. The rest of the house felt off, but those were the big spots that just radiated energy. But anywho, let's actually fast forward a few years. We moved out around 2014, and by that point, I had had a handful of bad dreams about that house. I had dreams of it when I lived there, which made sense, but even after leaving, they persisted. They actually persisted up to 2020. By that point, I was 21 years old. I'd been having dreams of that place for nearly a decade, and by this point, the dreams escalated to night terrors. I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. The dreams always occurred every 3 to 6 months. But by April of 2020, I'd had 3 intense night terrors about that house within 3 months. The last dream being my sister telling me someone had died in the pink bathroom. I started realizing that maybe something else was going on. I started researching the house and found the first owners, the ones who had built that house back in the 1950s. This seemed like a good place to start. I quickly discovered that it was a family that lived there, and that the father had died in the house in the 1980s. Upon further investigation, I learned he had died of a massive heart attack in the house. This house was located directly across the street from a hospital. Like the driveway and the hospital lot entrance lined up. Definitely clued me in on this being a traumatic death, so I continued. I found his wife's obituary. She had stayed in the house after he had passed. And since she had passed more recently, the information regarding their children was more up to date. I immediately felt drawn to one particular child, their one daughter. I actually ended up finding her on Facebook and reaching out. Of course, I realized what I was about to do could be potentially harmful or hurtful, so I prepared my message accordingly. I even mentioned the hotspots we covered earlier. I didn't mention what sensations or events happened in those areas, since I wanted to see what she had to say. My heart stopped when I read, "He died in the pink bathroom." The last dream where I dreamed my sister told me someone died in the pink bathroom. Could it have been a weird coincidence? She continued to say that she loved his workshop and that he never let anyone in. And on top of that, always spent time downstairs by that corner entrance to his bar, since that's where he kept his favourite drinks. My bedroom belonged to his wife, who no longer loved him the way he loved her, which would make sense as to why I felt eyes from the doorway, but never would that presence enter my room. She also shared that she was the child closest to her father, and they shared the room my sister stayed in. I asked my sister about this later on, and she stated she definitely felt uncomfortable in the house, but never any specifics. I told my daughter about the man I saw in my imagination, a very tall, well-dressed man. She said her dad was 6'3" and a businessman, always buttoned down and slacking. She also sent me a picture of him, and it was the exact same man I saw in my head. After this, I've never had another dream involving the house ever again. It's been almost 3 years free of those awful dreams. Could he have used me to tell his daughter he was so close that he was still around? But there was more to the other side? And the only way to get my attention was through my dreams? It almost seems so self-absorbed to think he would choose me to do such a thing, but I'm not sure of any other explanation. All my life, I've had weird paranormal or borderline psychic occurrences, but this one is definitely the most interesting to date. It's 3 a.m. where I am, and I just finished a movie. I turned the TV off and just laid on the couch in the dark for a while. I don't know what came over me, but I got the urge to suddenly get up and move around the room, slowly. I then fixated on the street lamp, like coming in from the window and making a bright stripe on the carpet. It was so bright. I swear the brightest thing I've ever seen. I then got this feeling that this is what the light is like when talking about heaven. The only reasoning I have for why I thought the light was heaven is because recently my dog passed away, and it's been extremely hard on me and constantly on my mind. My arms and shoulders then instantly felt weightless, and I felt like I was floating around the room. Again, I'm fully awake. All my senses are maxed out. I feel like I can hear the smallest noises coming from outside. I can see perfectly in the dark. I look around the room and I feel like I stepped into an alternate universe. Everything looks the same, but something in the air is different, as if I was the only person in the world. I truly questioned if I was in the Twilight Zone. I'm on edge, waiting for something to happen. I told myself, okay, that's enough now, and I slowly came out of it. Then all my weight came back to my body. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before, and I don't understand it. If this had happened at any other time of the day, I would have brushed it off. But then again, when do things like this happen? At normal hours of the day. Just to preface, this happened like 5 years ago, when I was a freshman in high school and had been sick for a couple of days. This was in my parents' house, and to my knowledge, nobody has ever died there. I've never really been able to rationalize it, even though I genuinely don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. I was sleeping in bed and woke up because my phone was playing music. It was about halfway through the song Love by Keshia Cole, which was on my playlist at the time. I paused the song and checked the time. It was somewhere around 5 a.m, if I remember correctly, and turned over towards my door. Standing right next to my bed, there was a person or entity or something staring at me. It was dark, so I couldn't see it very well, but it looked like a person wearing a dark robe and a white mask, with no mouth and small black eyes. The closest thing I can compare them to is No Face from Spirited Away. I remember not feeling afraid for some reason. Like I said, I was sick at the time and didn't really know what to do. So I just stared at it for about 5 minutes and went back to sleep. I woke up and assumed it was a dream until I opened up my phone and saw my music app open with Love by Keshia Cole on pause exactly where I had stopped it that night. I talked to my dad about it and he said it was probably a fever dream, but I don't understand how the music would be there, as I don't listen to music to fall asleep. And as far as I can remember, the last app I used before bed was Snapchat. Nothing weird has happened since, but the experience weirds me out to this day. Any explanations would be appreciated, paranormal or otherwise. My mom sent me a text yesterday about Sharon Osbourne being rushed to the hospital while filming a show at the Glen Tavern Inn. It reminded me of our experience there, and I wanted to post it. It wasn't really a crazy experience, but it's something we can't explain. I think it was 2015. My mom, stepdad, brother and I went to Santa Paula just for fun, but we decided to stay at the Glen Tavern Inn because we thought it would be cool to stay somewhere supposedly haunted. Right when we walked in, my mom said it felt like stepping into a different dimension. My stepdad started asking the man at the front desk if he's ever had any paranormal experiences while working there. The man said yes and started talking about the things he would see. I think I remember him saying he would often see an older woman and a couple of kids in the hallways. He said he would hear laughter, voices, loud footsteps and music that wasn't actually playing. He also said the restaurant was quite active. Sadly, I don't remember the floor or room we stayed in. Everything was pretty normal until my mom woke up around 5 a.m. When she woke up, the bathroom faucet was turned on and the door to our room was open. I was contacted by a middle-aged couple regarding problems with the car overriding the operator's driving commands. The car was recently given to their son by the parents of a deceased teen. The deceased person was actually their son's best friend, who was killed in a vehicle accident when the two had exchanged cars for the night. Their son had a new Jeep Cherokee that his friend wanted to use to go on a date. While on said date, the friend was involved in an accident with a drunk driver and perished. The deceased boy's parents signed over the title of his Toyota pickup, both as a general gift and to replace his vehicle that was totaled in the wreck. I investigated the car with the help of a Toyota mechanic. He checked all systems, including the computer, braking, engine, and all sensors. Nothing was found. I drove the truck for 2 days on my normal daily routine with my DVR, EMF meter, camcorder, and dashcam running. No evidence collected. I returned the vehicle with my findings that I did not believe the vehicle was haunted. 6 weeks later, I was again contacted by the couple. The father was using the truck when suddenly the vehicle made an abrupt right turn, locked up the brakes, and went into a ditch. At the same time, a car driven by a drunk entered the road from a side street without stopping and proceeded to slam into a tree. All of this was witnessed by a sheriff who just happened to be nearby running radar. The drunk driver sustained minor injuries, and the father was unhurt. I was provided with the sheriff's number and asked to call him. When I called and told him what I was calling in reference to, he was happy to share not only a reading of the report that he filed, but information he said that could not be included in the reports also. His report stated that while conducting normal duties, he witnessed a Mustang run a stop sign at speed and turn onto the road, fishtailing and tires squealing. Almost immediately, it left the road and slammed head-on into a tree at approximately 45 miles per hour. He checked the accident victim and found him unconscious and with minor trauma to the forehead. There was an open bottle of vodka spilling on the passenger seat. The sheriff's statement was not included in the report. I was parked facing an oncoming pickup truck when I witnessed it lock up its brakes and make a sharp right turn into the ditch. My initial thought was that it was stolen and the driver panicked when he saw me. Before I could react, the Mustang entered from a side road about 50 feet in front of me and turned toward the pickup truck, which had entered the ditch about 200 feet before it would have reached the side road. The driver of the pickup could not have seen the Mustang's approach due to trees and bush obscuring his line of sight. If he had not turned into that ditch, there would have been an unavoidable impact between the two vehicles. How he knew to react the way he did is beyond me. The driver's statement to me was that he did not perform the action. The truck did it by itself. I received a call from a couple who had recently purchased a new home and was having strange events occur in their barn. The backstory on this property is that the original home was built in the 1840s. The barn was added a few years later, but there was no record. The original house burned down in 1976, and a new one built on the old foundation in 1981. Upon arriving, I noticed the property was impeccably kept, and although it was very rural and set far back off the road, a driveway was added and paved to the house. This was unusual for the area and indicated to me a level of sophistication to the owners. In other words, they were most likely not from a rural area. I was greeted at the door and invited in by a young couple that I would guess in their mid-20s. The home was as well kept and clean on the inside as it had been on the out. We chatted for a few moments and they insisted that I see the barn. I noted that there was absolutely no feeling or atmosphere in the house, then followed them to the kitchen and the back door. There was a kiddie fence blocking the entrance to the kitchen, preventing 4 miniature goats from exiting the kitchen. This was a shock, since I had judged these people by what I had witnessed up until this point. When I asked about the goats in the house, I was told they had no choice, because whatever was in the barn tried to kill them. They had lost 2 goats already, and the vet told them that they were likely frightened to death. Approaching the barn, you could see that they had been at work putting their decorative style here also. From the outside, there was a new fence surrounding the front and creating a small yard of about 1/4 of an acre. It was clean and recently raked. The barn was in the style of an old tobacco barn that had been repurposed and painted. As we entered, I noticed that the hair on my arms immediately stood up. I definitely sensed something there. I asked if there was a specific area where there seemed to be more activity. I was shown the milking room that they had set up. The man told me that once he built the milking stall, everything started. I asked for some time to poke around by myself and noticed that they practically ran out. I walked around the milking room for about an hour. That was a lot, since it was a small room. On the opposite side of the barn, I found another room slightly larger than the milking room. It had a concrete floor and freshly panelled and painted walls. It had electricity, a sink, and some equipment that was recognised as being used to make cheese. This room did not interest me at all. It felt sterile and uncomfortable, like an operating room. I was sure nothing was lurking there. It wasn't until I was walking around in the stable area that I really felt something. This part of the barn had only a dirt floor, and although it was raked clean, it didn't feel that way. I'm not a psychic, but I have learned to pay attention to my body and my impressions. To be honest with you, all that I wanted to do in that area was rake it clean myself. Perplexed, I summoned the man and asked him if he had found anything in that area. He seemed slightly embarrassed, as he explained that along the wall there had been a deep trench with something that looked like a pile of old leather that had been folded and stacked at one end of it. He asked me not to tell his wife, but he had just covered it over instead of removing it, as he had just felt like it was too dirty to touch. I asked for a shovel and assured him that I would not tell his wife and cover it back up when finished. He agreed and provided a shovel before hurrying back to the house. 5 minutes later, I had located the leather. As the man had claimed, it was all dried and hard, and did look as if it was nothing that anyone would ever want to touch. As I fought to unwrap it, it was stuck with the feeling that it may cause me to get sick. I felt nauseous as I handled it. Finally getting it unfolded, I found a very old memo typebook in it. The writing was still perfectly legible. It was a journal written by a Civil War soldier. As I scanned through it, about halfway through, I found the last page of writing. It had blood on it and said, "When you find me and read this, please tell Ma and Pa that I'm sorry. I tried to make it back home, but they caught me. I was shot, and I know I will die quickly. Please get my body home and bury me by the stream. I live in Savannah." Signed, Jonas. I refilled the hole and took the journal and leather to the front of the house. I asked the couple to come sit on the porch so that we could talk. I showed them the journal and suggested that we hold a small memorial service in the barn. They invited the only neighbours they knew, and we did just that in the barn by where I dug up the journal. I asked to take the journal with me, and the couple agreed. I took the journal to the Savannah Historical Society and asked if they would keep it on display as a remembrance to a lost son. They agreed, and I gave it to them. 3 weeks later, when I checked back with the couple, I was informed that the goats were back in the barn, and there were no issues. I was called by a lady who swore that her cat was possessed. I was incredibly skeptical, but very curious. According to the lady, her cat would suddenly start screaming at the top of its lungs. It would do this crazy-looking slow-motion walk while tittling its head at weird angles. If she tried to approach it when it did these things, it would lash out at her with its claws. After having one of these spells, it would hide but not relax. Its tail would swing wildly, and it would growl to itself for up to an hour. As strange as all of this sounded, I spoke to one of my team members who is very sensitive. After hearing the story, she insisted that we investigate. We arrived at the residence at around 4:30 p.m. The lady gave us a tour of the house and introduced us to the cat. It was a standard 3-2 ranch-style home, and we found nothing creepy about it. The cat was cool, very affectionate, and really took to my fellow investigator. She spent a couple of hours alone with the cat while I got the paperwork and formalities done with the lady. She invited us to investigate the home that night as she had a date, then worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift at the local hospital. She left for a date around 7:30 p.m. and we began our formal investigation. We moved room to room asking questions in hope for an EVP, or at least a knock in response to a question. We had no activity until at 11:30 p.m. the cat started screaming in the master bedroom. Upon entering the doorway, my partner grabbed my shoulder, stopping me and motioning finger to lip for me to be quiet and listen. It was hard with the cat screams. They made my hair stand on end. As we watched and listened, a shadow began to form in the corner of the room. There was a whisper coming from the shadow that was not recorded by our DVRs, and we couldn't understand what it said. The cat was irate. It was scared and ready to fight, so we witnessed the claims of the lady firsthand, and they were exactly as she had described. My partner spoke very calmly to the shadow, saying, "You are scaring the cat. I don't think you mean to. So if you leave this room and go into the bedroom across the hall, we will help you." We turned and entered the smaller bedroom and sat quietly on the bed, waiting to see what would happen. A few moments later, my partner grabbed my arm and pointed at the doorway into the spare bathroom shared by the two smaller bedrooms. I could clearly see a humanoid shape with no features, but it was blacker than the dark. This teammate and I had worked together many times and had a routine that we followed. I told the entity that everything was okay. The cat's calm now, and we want to know how we can help. It slowly moved through the doorway and slightly into the room. At that point, I heard through my DVR the word kitty. While recording, I always plug in an earpiece so I can hear what is being recorded in real time. I asked if it was trying to pet the kitty, and it stretched out its arm, pointing towards the master bedroom, where the cat was. I asked if it wanted to hurt the kitty, and almost immediately heard a sigh and whimper. I asked again if it wanted to hurt the kitty, and stated that in order for us to help, it needed to answer. My partner told me a minute later that it answered. She sensed that it indicated that it only wanted to pet the cat. She also sensed that this was the spirit of an adolescent male, and she thought that in life he had some type of developmental issue. While we spoke, the entity seemed to sway slightly back and forth, but it didn't go anywhere. It seemed like it was listening to our conversation. I once again spoke to it, saying that it scared the cat, and if it wanted to pet it, that it would have to make friends with it. I explained that if it would just sit still and speak to the cat, that it would learn that you don't want to hurt it. Eventually, the cat will come to you and let you pet it. A moment later, the cat appeared in the hall doorway and sat down calmly. No one spoke or even moved, including the spirit. A few moments later, the cat joined us on the bed. I spoke to it calmly, and my partner scratched its neck and head. As I looked back up from the cat at the spirit, I noticed that it was gone. We experienced nothing else that night and locked up the house and left. 2 days later, my teammate called me very excited. She had researched the property and found that a young man who had Down syndrome had died on the property when he had fallen out of a treehouse. We gathered our evidence and met the lady the following day. I played her all of the recordings of us talking to the spirit so that she would understand what exactly had happened. When she heard me tell the spirit how to make friends with the cat, she began to cry. She told us that only that morning, the cat was on the bed in the smaller bedroom. It was purring very loud and moving its head, like someone was scratching it. I spent many years stationed in Germany. I did 2 years tours, mostly, and each was in a different place. This occurred while stationed in Kitzingen, Larsen Barracks. That base was flanked by forest. There was an old abbey located a couple miles away, through the forest, and was said to be haunted. A couple of other guys in my company were also interested in ghosts. We had investigated a few of the castles around the general area, so when we heard about this place, it was a no-brainer. Our plan was to set out Friday after the last formation and make the hike and set up camp. We slept that night, and the next morning, we went to the abbey. It had been closed for years, but it was open during the day for tours. After it closed for the day, no one was supposed to be on the grounds, but that was not enforced nor patrolled. It was basically left open. Upon arriving, we took the tour and learned the history and layout. Around noon, we went back to camp to fix some lunch and relax before ghost hunting around 10 p.m. When we reached camp, it was destroyed. It appeared that some kind of animal had gotten into everything. It threw all our personal stuff from our backpacks all over, tore down our shelter halves, and basically just made a big mess without destroying anything. We cleaned up and reset camp. None of our food was missing, but that wasn't surprising since most of it was in cans. Surprisingly, the couple boxes of crackers and loaf of bread had not been taken or damaged. Around 10 p.m. that night, we went back to the abbey. We investigated it thoroughly inside and out. We never heard or saw anything. We stuck it out until around 4 a.m, hoping something might show up, but nothing did. We made our way back to camp, disappointed and tired. When we got there, that animal had been back. It had done the exact same thing as before, except this time, those boxes of crackers and loaf of bread were scattered around like everything else, out of the wrappers and on the ground. We were pretty pissed off. If we had been able to see the hike out, we would have, but those woods were too dark. Once again, we cleaned up, and about an hour before it would start getting light out, we crashed for a few hours. 2 hours later, I was startled awake by one of the guys yelling and cussing up a storm. Camp was trashed again, and we had slept through it. Even our shelter halves had been ripped down as we slept under them. The only difference was that our personal items, socks, underwear and t-shirts, were made into a trail leading out of camp. We packed everything up and started following the trail of clothing. When we reached the last of it, there was a small pile consisting of one pair of underwear belonging to each of us, and the crotch had been ripped out of each one. About 100 feet away, we could see the perimeter fence to our base. I never went back into that forest the rest of the time I was stationed there. When I was in high school, my friends and I used to go to Black Snake Road to race each other. It was in a very rural area and had little traffic and was very dark. We called it that because of several hairpin turns. However, there was a perfect half mile that was marked by a bridge on one end and a train track on the other. One night, after several of us had been racing, I found that I was the last to leave. As I approached the bridge, I saw a girl standing there dripping wet. I stopped and asked if she was okay, and she responded that her boyfriend missed the bridge and crashed into the water. She said that he was still in the truck. I got out of my car and ran around the side of the bridge and down the embankment. There was no deep river, but just a shallow creek. I saw no evidence of a truck or anything out of the ordinary. Returning to the top of the bridge, I found her standing next to my car, dripping wet and crying. There were no cell phones back then, so I offered to drive her home so that we could call the police from there. She accepted and directed me to her home. On the ride home, she told me that her name was Sally. Her home was directly across the street from a small church, a couple away from the bridge. As we pulled into the driveway, she asked me to go to the door and get her mother. I knocked at the door of the dark house, feeling a little uneasy. After all, it was after midnight by this point, and I knew that I was waking everyone in the house. After a few moments, an older lady answered, who I assumed was her grandmother. I told her what happened and that Sally was upset and wanted her mother to come to the car. That's when the story got even stranger. The lady told me that her daughter Sally had been dead for over 30 years. She had drowned when her boyfriend missed the bridge and flipped his truck, trapping her inside. Surprised and not thinking very clearly, I insisted that she come to my car, which she did. Slippers, housecoat and all. The passenger side window was rolled down, which Sally had done. My old Malibu had cranked windows. They were a pain to roll down, and I couldn't reach the handle from the driver's seat. There was a puddle in the passenger seat, but no Sally. The lady asked me to walk across the road to the graveyard next to the church. We did, and she showed me Sally's grave. That incident started a 40-year pursuit of the paranormal for me. I've investigated all over the world since then, while serving in the military and my work afterward. Ghosts are real. I suffer from occasional sleep paralysis. When this happens, I wake up from what is usually a nightmare, but can't open my eyes or move, except to scream a muffled groan. I also feel an immense weight or pressure on my chest, like some people describe as something holding them down. This goes on for a few minutes, until I can either snap out of it, or my girlfriend rushes over to me to soothe and gently wake me up. This has happened a number of times over the years, but a couple instances in particular stand out. So I was having an episode of sleep paralysis, but this night, it happened twice, back to back. I had just fallen asleep not 30 minutes, when suddenly my head started to buzz and vibrate. It also got very cold in this instance. Like other episodes, I couldn't move, but this time I could open my eyes. However, I couldn't see. It was like what some visually impaired people describe as only being able to see out of their peripheral vision. It was just a blackness in the main view of my vision, paired with this headache-inducing vibration of my skull, with the sound of a booming, low-frequency humming. Not a hole unlike when you hear the deep bass hits in the music of the movie Inception, but just one very low and loud note. It was terrifying because it's never happened like this before. Finally, I managed to wake up, got some water, told my girlfriend about it, and attempted to sleep again. But it happened again. Same blindness, same humming, and same symptoms. My girlfriend then had to shake me out of it this time. Needless to say, I wasn't able to go back to sleep until the following night out of exhaustion. The other incident was a night terror where I was hunted by a demon or witch. I felt sharp, long nails piercing into my chest, but I couldn't wake up out of it and felt the pain of being impaled. So a long time ago, about 3 summers ago maybe, me and my 3 cousins were playing hide and seek. We had played with a Ouija board the day prior. We all heard footsteps outside my bedroom door while we were hiding, and when I came out to look, no one was there. Anyways, that's old news. It's been a while and I've had several more experiences, and I fear it's getting stronger, whatever it is. So after a while, I started to have several nights where I would experience sleep paralysis. I would wake up and I would see a little girl out of the corner of my eye. She was young and had grey skin and had patchy hair, and it looked like she had been crying as there was a black line going down from the corners of her eyes. Anyways, it was like she was shy and really didn't like being looked at. Eventually, I moved out of my parents' house and moved in with my now ex-girlfriend, and I didn't seem to like her at all. There was one morning she woke up in the middle of the night screaming and asked me to look at her back, and she had 3 red lines going down her back. There was another time where my girlfriend was playing on my Xbox, and all of a sudden, her hair was grabbed and yanked back. Meanwhile, While I'm living away from home, my family is experiencing something mimicking their voice. My mom heard my sister call her from upstairs, and my sister heard my mom call her downstairs. And last night, I heard it calling my name. First it used my sister's voice, then switched to my mom's voice, then strangely used my former girlfriend's voice. I'm afraid it's slowly getting stronger, and I don't want to do one thing that only makes it mad and more strong. So a bit of a backstory. Last summer, my cousins came to spend it with my family, so there were 4 kids and 2 adults in the house. Me and my oldest cousin were in my room playing with a plastic Ouija board around 8ish. Obviously, nothing happened. I threw slurs into the empty dark room. My cousin laughed, and we walked away from the board. I didn't think I would have to say goodbye, since nothing happened. Well, I might have been wrong. Later that night, around 10ish, the 2 youngest asked us to play hide and seek with them. I thought why not, and agreed. We played a couple of rounds and nothing happened. Skip to around 12. I remember vividly that I was in my closet hiding my youngest cousin beside me, since she didn't know where else to hide. My oldest cousin hiding under my covers on my bed with pillows on top of her. My oldest cousin was getting kind of tired of not being found first and decided to hide there so it would be easy to jump out and scare my sister, who was seeking. Now I think it would be wise to mention we're upstairs and the parents are downstairs. The stairs up, even though they're carpeted, they still creak. We heard the garage door open. That's where my sister was counting. She does the old ready or not, here I come. It's a bit of a walk from the garage door to the stairs, so we're just waiting. There was no creak at the stairs, but all of a sudden, we heard footsteps pacing back and forth in front of my doorway. My cousin, thinking it was her, jumps out from the covers and does a fake scream, followed by a blood-curdling scream. I burst out from the closet and looked towards the open door as I did. I catch a glimpse of a dark, distorted figure that flies to the left. Being the oldest, I ran out the door. To the left is a bathroom. I searched everywhere, but it was gone. My oldest cousin mentioned later that we had forgotten to say goodbye. I simply responded, I know. Me and my buddies enjoy late-night walks on the trails within the various conservation areas in my region of southwestern Ontario. Late last week, we decided to check out an area called Pleasant Valley. To my knowledge, this area has a deep-rooted history with the Underground Railroad, Indigenous peoples, as well as the War of 1812, if I'm not mistaken, given its proximity to Lake Erie. We entered the woods at about 2 a.m, and immediately upon entering, I was overcome with a bad feeling. And after walking for some time, the feeling progressively worsened until we reached 2 bent trees in an X over the path. My one buddy pointed out the fact that it's bad juju to go underneath, and we should just call it a night, as we all felt watched. As soon as we turn around and start to head back, the entire forest seems dramatically quieter. We all hear a loud, distinctively human whistle behind us, almost like how you would call a dog over. There's no way anyone could have been out there at that hour, and there are no homes in close enough proximity for someone to be out and about. We all ran, and I was honestly terrified. Me and my friends are all relatively big guys, and we're all comfortable in the woods, so it takes a lot to get us running. Upon leaving, there was a faint smell of rotting eggs, and it was not present upon our initial entry. It begins with me and 2 of my girlfriends playing the so-called game hide and seek alone. I've played it twice before, but nothing ever happened. We do the usual, prepare the doll, put one of our hairs inside, and start the game. We went to hide, all of us sitting on a windowsill behind a thick curtain, our legs propped up on the radiator underneath. I started with a strong mindset, as I do not believe in the paranormal. Not even a minute into the game, I started hearing soft parts of what seemed to be little feet stuffed with rice, slowly going from the bathroom to my room. One of my other friends looked at me in shock. Knowing I do not want to fuck around, we ran to the bathroom to spit salt water on the doll. When I ran past my room, I could still hear the little pit-pats of the tiny feet. When we got to the bathroom, the doll hadn't moved. Nothing had in fact moved. We end the ritual and choose to throw the plushie away. Now, the weird shit begins over the course of around 3 to 4 months. It was 6 a.m. the same day we did the ritual. I was smoking a cigarette with one of the friends. While we were chatting, a cigarette butt sprung up from the ashtray and rolled onto the table. We both saw it. A few days later, I was home alone with my boyfriend. I went to feed the cats in my mom's room, and I saw my old crusty, dusty lamp was turned on. A week after the lamp, I had an incident with a guy who would come to my door at weird hours of the night and ring the intercom, looking for me with a knife. My intercom started ringing at 4 a.m, and I decided that was it, and I filed a police report. While waiting for that, I talked with the administrator of the block of flats and asked her to look at the security cameras and tell me what he was doing the previous night. The administrator said nobody rang my intercom at 4 a.m. that night. She looked from 3 a.m. through to 4:30 a.m. with no person coming or going out of my block. Some time passes. A month later, the same 2 girlfriends come to sleep over. This one is by far the weirdest. They usually sleep on the couch in my living room. I went to sleep at around 3 a.m. I'll call them A and B for easier description. A has a weird feeling all night long, waking up continuously to look at the hallway to check if someone is there. At around 3:30, B feels 3 fingers tapping her shoulder twice and waking her up. B told me she felt the couch was very crowded. She turns around and sees me, sleeping in between her and A. She goes back to sleep. Sometime later, a light from a weird electrical box behind the TV turns on and wakes B up. She gets up to grab a shirt and throw it in front of the light. She drinks some water and stuff. And she turns on the flashlight and sees my hair again, this time tugging A from behind. B says, "Good night, girls." A responds to her, I don't. In the morning, I was no longer with them in bed. They come to wake me up and ask me if I had slept with them. Of course, I was shocked. I told them I've been in my room since I went to sleep. I've never slept walk in my life. I'm a heavy corpse sleeper, wherever you put me. I don't move an inch until I've slept enough. I sigh and grab my sage, not expecting anything. Close all the windows and doors in my home, sit on the couch and light the sage. Where I was sitting, the air became very cold and my whole right side turned cold as ice. The day before today, the big water bowl I keep for my pets in the bathroom was spilled. My mum found it. The bowl was completely empty and there was no water to be found. The bathroom tiles were dry, no lick of water anywhere. We cannot explain where it went. Forward to today. I wake up at around 11 a.m, walk my dog, have a shower, and eat something. A was over at my place sleeping on the couch. I go back to sleep while waiting for A to wake up. I start dreaming. I see my room, get up to go to the living room. A is no longer there. In her place, right where she was sleeping, I saw a figure who looked a lot like her, just very disfigured. Wearing the robe A was wearing in my house. The person or thing was staring right into my soul. I get scared and lock myself in my room and lay in bed. I start experiencing sleep paralysis, but this time I'm terrified for some reason. In reality now, A already woke up. I saw her open my door to wake me up. I was experiencing sleep paralysis and trying to give her signals to wake me. She decides to let me sleep, not knowing I'm in terrible pain and scared as fuck. She leaves, and I cannot wake myself from paralysis this time. I eventually fall asleep. I start dreaming again. It's just 40 minutes on the clock of me trying really hard to stand up from the bed. but some force kept pushing me back down and pinning me with strength, suffocating me, and I was paralysed. My whole body hurt and I was so fucking scared. I felt a presence near me, on the right. I kept trying to grab the phone, but I would drop it, as I was barely able to even move. I felt so awake the whole time. When 40 minutes pass in real life, I hear the kitchen door open and A coming to wake me up. Exactly the second she opens the door, this unexplainable force just disappears, and I spring up on my butt on the bed, shouting A's name, instantly starting to cry. For some reason, I really thought I was going to die. I've never been this terrified. Guys, am I crazy? What's going on? I know this all sounds impossible or made up, but believe me, it turned from a joke to something that's starting to really scare me. What should I do? For some background, when my dog passed, we took him to a guy who did pet cremation and prepared cute memorial gifts like paw prints and such. My mum asked what got him interested in the business, and he told us a story about his first dog. To make a long story short, when she died, he had placed a garden light around the place where she was buried, or used to hang out a lot. I don't quite remember. This light kept turning on, even when it wasn't supposed to, and even after it broke, he said it kept lighting up anyway. This guy was a little kooky, so I just smiled and nodded, appreciating the story as more of a story he used to console himself after the death of his beloved pet. This past week, however, I've been at my mom's house for Christmas, and this decorative Christmas tree that's placed on the mantle, next to where our dog's urn and box is kept, keeps turning on and off randomly. At first I assumed my mom was turning it off and on, as she came and went. But then one day, she asks who keeps turning it off and on. One by one, everyone said it wasn't them, and I honestly believed them. This morning, it was off again, so my mom goes to see if the battery ran out, or if someone turned it off. She flips the switch once, it stays off. So she flips it again, and suddenly it's back on. So clearly it was not the battery, and no one had turned it off. It seems to turn on by itself anytime there's people in the area, and turn off when we leave. As if he came to hang out with us when we were there like he used to, when he was alive. To make things more interesting, anytime it's on, our dogs seem to like hanging out or sleeping in that area. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being sentimental like the guy was being. So you can believe this story or see it as a consolation story. I won't be offended either way, because honestly, I'm not sure what to think myself. The logical part of my brain wants to say it's just faulty wiring, but my heart wants to believe it's my childhood dog. When I was younger, I used to perform in community theatre plays and musicals a lot. I went on to get a degree in acting and am now working as a professional stage actor. But I got my start in little community theatres in my hometown. One of the last shows that I was in before moving away for college was Monty Python's Spamalot. It's essentially the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail turned into a stage musical. I loved being in this show. It was hilarious and audiences loved us every night. On the closing night of the show, we were performing one of the big dance numbers in the second act. This number involved several members of the cast running down from the stage and into the aisles in the audience to do a little bit of fun audience interaction. When I got to my mark in the aisle, I locked eyes with a man just a few rows away from where I was, maybe 2 or 3 seats in from the aisle. The auditorium was dark, and I never would have expected this in my wildest dreams, so it took me a few moments to even register. This man was my grandfather, who had passed away 4 years prior to this. No, it wasn't someone who looked like him. Unless he had a secret identical twin, this was my grandfather, and there were no 2 ways around it. He made eye contact back at me, gave me a thumbs up, and I stumbled back to the stage as I forgot my choreography due to what I just saw. I made a mental note of where he was sitting and looked back at that seat during the next scene of the show. Sure enough, by then, he was no longer there. The seat was empty. I checked multiple more times throughout the rest of the show, wondering if the seat was just empty due to someone getting up to use the restroom. But no, it remained empty. I even went so far as to ask the box office manager after the performance, who confirmed that nobody had purchased that seat for the performance. That changed this morning around 6:45 a.m. I recently moved back into my dad's house, and sometimes when I'm alone or when my dad and I are both upstairs, I hear cupboard doors opening, someone using our downstairs tap, etc. But I never really let it get to me, as while I believe in supernatural things, I don't go too far into it. But then this morning when I woke up, I was scared shitless by what I saw. I was laid facing my bedroom wall for a moment, my back to the rest of the room. I wondered what the time was and rolled over to check. It was when I looked up above my side table when I saw this young boy. He was giving me the Kubrick stare and he was grinning. His eyes looked pink and he was just standing there. I immediately jumped up and I turned the light on. He was gone. I felt like I had a panic attack or something, so I messaged my boyfriend immediately because I didn't know what I saw. It really freaked me out. Growing up in a Hispanic household, you hear a lot about the paranormal, and mostly, everyone has experienced something. I'm no different. My parents bought their own home when I was around 3, and ever since, I always felt or witnessed odd things. But there are too many little incidents to bore you with them. But they all have one thing in common, and that's that they all happen close by, or in the hallway to that home. This event does not happen there, and instead happens in my home, just last year. My mom passed away in 2020. Since 2001, she had dialysis 3 times a week at 5 a.m. And I was in my 20s and not married, and lived with both my parents at the time. I would take her every time to her appointments. Whenever I did a late shift at work or would oversleep, she would walk to my door and say, "I'm ready, can we go?" I'd get up and drive her. I'm now married with kids of my own and in my own house. Last year, my wife had scheduled an outpatient surgery in the early morning. I was working in another state, but drove home the day before. I got home in the early hours of the morning and told my wife I was going to sleep on the couch for 3 hours till we had to leave. Her wake-up alarm was about to ring. So with her eyes closed, she said, "Okay." I was in such a deep sleep that the 3 hours flew by like a wink. But then I clearly heard my mum say, "I'm ready, can we go?" I woke up and immediately realised what I had heard. I hear my wife open the restroom door and she walks over to me and says, "Oh good, I was about to wake you up." Till this day, I know what I heard and know she's still around watching over me. It wasn't so much as a scary incident, but definitely unexplained.